Igneous the Friendly Magnorite was a fan-favorite character in Songs of War. He was loved for his optimism, kindness, and non-stop chatter to Sen about anything and everything. Near the end of the movie, Igneous parted ways from Sen as he sailed to Carthan to liberate other Magnorites from tyranny, and this led to a very disappointing, lackluster subplot in Season 2. There was only one memorable event in the Carthan arc, so today, the Rewrite Gang and I are gonna fix that. Songs of War is a full-length, voice-acted Minecraft movie by Squared Media that I recommend watching before the rest of this video. As always, huge thank you to the Rewrite Gang, especially Alex for rewriting a good majority of this arc. And as usual, we have some amazing renderers to credit, including Snake, Lukus, Asher, Meowsomnia, Stopwatch, LuccaMOTION, The Fall, and Detective Chronos. This is our 5th fan rewrite video, and beyond this point there will be spoilers for the other rewrites as well as the original script. With all the obligatory disclaimers out of the way, let's begin. Alright, first up, we've got Igneous himself. Our favorite book-loving dude who has his own thoughts and beliefs, contrary to almost every other Magnorite who more or less act like sheep. We aren't changing much about Igneous, just adding on to what the script gave us with some new stuff. He's the hero of Carthan, the savior of Phaethon, and the weakest Magnorite turned legend. Need I say more? The actual rewriting starts with Borgin. In the script, Borgin opposes Malachi, Carthan's dictator. In this rewrite, Borgin actually starts out as a minor villain. He's Malachi's right-hand man and the second strongest Magnorite alive. Thus, he serves as the enforcer and overseer of Mount Kalos, Carthan's most important military base. Malachi himself is getting an upgrade too. Like many other rewrite villains, we're making him much more memorable and evil. Malachi's now the freaking Minecraft equivalent of Kim Jong-un. I don't think I need to elaborate much further. He kinda has a god complex and turned Carthan into a complete Orwellian nightmare, 1984 style. Since Onyx is a Magnorite too, we may as well discuss him here. He was the weakest of his pack, and abandoned Carthan. Rhea and Greg found him, and Onyx, looking for a fight, challenged Greg as he foolishly believed he could take the Jagathan down. After getting humiliated by Greg, he angrily leaves and childishly vowed revenge on them. Yet Rhea walked up and instead offered him a place in their group, promising him the chance to grow stronger through battles against Ardonia's enemies. With that enticing prospect, and the chance to be close to Greg to one day get his revenge, Onyx accepted Rhea's offer and became the 5th member of the Knights of Ardonia. As time went on, the relationship between Onyx and Greg evolved into a very one-sided rivalry where Onyx constantly tries to one-up Greg, but our favorite Jagathan outperforms him easily and always acts friendly afterwards. Onyx's constant defeats to Greg caused him to become more self-conscious of his weakness and grew frustrated every time. Other than that, the two got along pretty well. Though Onyx would never admit it, he eventually began respecting Greg's strength and his humbleness about it, while Greg would likewise admire Onyx's determination and will to keep going despite the monstrous gap in strength between them. With Onyx out of the way, let's get back to the characters actually living in Carthan. Okay, serious question, does anybody remember Maxwell from the script? Yeah, me neither. For the 3 people watching who do remember Maxwell, we're making him more complicated too. He was originally a boring human politician who wanted peace for all. But that's pretty unrealistic. Rewrite Maxwell is more of an anti-villain. He still wants to change Carthan for the better, yet he only cares for the betterment of humankind, and absolutely hates Magnorites. He wants to get rid of them all, seeing them as nothing more than a hive mind species and a huge liability. Maxwell wants to replace the Carthan Magnorite government and make the kingdom more human-centric, and either exile all Magnorites, enslave them, or genocide their species in its entirety. His end goal is peace. But his reasoning behind it and the route he's taking to get there is very immoral. Almost every Carthan character is rewritten to be more nuanced, two-faced, and pessimistic as a contrast to Igneous' blazing optimism, so he'll have to use his smarts to convince people to join his cause and end the dictatorship the kingdom has found itself in. Igneous' arc starts when he arrives at Meridian, in Cydonia. Cydonia is largely hostile to Magnorites thanks to their reputation as aggravators, yet Igneous finds Aaron the Fletcher and convinces Aaron to take him to the Carthan Wall. Before we go any further, I should mention we're extending this arc so we have more time to expand on the lore. So, the two of them head off into the deserts of Cydonia. Aaron rides a camel while Igneous walks, and they become friends and have a sense of camaraderie throughout their journey. Igneous being a Magnorite made the journey fairly easy thanks to his traveling experience and being able to easily fight off the husks of the desert at night. Aaron starts warning Igneous what he's getting himself into. Carthan is a merciless dictatorship that's difficult to sneak in, or get out. One of the few ways to get in undetected is through these desolate stone mountains to the east, left largely unguarded thanks to another great threat, block giants. This image is in the original draft docs, and these rock giants inhabit the mountains east of Carthan. They're normally dormant and peaceful. However, they're so massive that even when they move in their sleeping state, it causes earthquakes in the area. The giants have also accidentally stepped on explorers before by just not even knowing they were there. These giants have caused trouble outside of their mountains before too, accidentally wandering into Magnorite territory and causing mass destruction. They've been used for war as well. Carthan has committed war crimes on Cydonia by awaking the block giants on purpose and guiding them to the neighboring kingdom to trample and wreak havoc on their lands. There's even a legend that the Deathsinger himself slayed one of these giants in the Great War, making him a terrifying legend to even the Magnorites, as they know how dangerous the giants are. Aaron warns Igneous they may wake if he walks through there, and if he chooses that path, he would have to take his time. This is actually how Onyx escaped Carthan. He was the only one stupid enough to traverse through here and was lucky enough to not wake one, even boasting to his packmates how he wasn't afraid and waltzed right into their territory, and his packmates never saw him again. This mountain range is one of only 2 ways to infiltrate or defect from Carthan. The other way is through a narrow blind spot used by smugglers and spies leading straight to Tartarus, and it's way harder to get through, but much faster than the mountains. And so, Igneous being Igneous, decides to use the narrow opening, choosing the riskier but faster path, wanting to waste no time. When they finally arrive at the border, Aaron offers Igneous a job, and while Igneous seems to briefly consider it, he simply thanks him and politely declines. Aaron says his offer will still stand should he survive and change his mind. They part ways as comrades with mutual respect, and as Aaron and his camel begin walking back, Igneous heads to the narrow pathway. After barely avoiding being caught, he manages to sneak inside the kingdom without being detected. Once in Tartarus, he's still quite naive to the reality the Magnorites here face. He's heard plenty about it, but actually seeing it for himself is much different than what he thought. Igneous holds his head up high as opposed to every other Magnorite. They walk with their heads down low. Malachi's totalitarian rule has destroyed any sense of individuality they may have had in the past, taking advantage of the following the crowd mentality of other Magnorites. Igneous is the only one who actually looks up and sees beyond what's currently happening, literally and metaphorically, and all the other Magnorites who are just regular citizens are in a trance-like state. They're locked in a cycle of pointless aggression, being pitted against one another and blindly following orders rather than recognizing who the real enemy is. Malachi is rarely seen by many aside from his grand speeches, and he never interacts with lowly civilians unless they do something horribly wrong in his eyes. He's more of a big brother entity in the first few episodes. Malachi isn't physically there, but he's used as a threat that always watches and looms over everyone in Carthan to keep them in line. Igneous asks other Magnorites for their names and what's going on, but they all ignore him and go back to their work. Nobody even answers Igneous, and he eventually walks to a nearby tavern in defeat, sitting down and just trying to get a grasp on it all. He then sees a small group of humans and eavesdrops as they mention a human politician named Maxwell. Igneous goes to find Maxwell and tries to get more answers from the politician. Despite being in a high position in the government, Maxwell's power is still very limited compared to Malachi's. Over the years, he's slowly been trying to diminish the political power Magnorites have over the kingdom, still bent on erasing them entirely. When Igneous knocks on his door asking questions about the way things are, Maxwell's at first suspicious and passive-aggressive, yet suddenly he realizes the golden opportunity he has with Igneous and formulates a plan to use him as a tool to stir up a coup. He lets Igneous in and helps him understand the weight of their situation, at first out of pure selfishness. Maxwell's advice is genuine though, and Igneous begins to hide his naivete by acting more like a typical Magnorite, blending in with the crowd and going with the flow. He goes to Mount Kalos undercover as a worker, as Maxwell says there's information he'll need for their plans, and Kalos is the easiest way to find answers. Uncovering Malachi's plan in the capital, the very heart of the dictatorship, would be riskier. Plus, only Magnorites are allowed in Mount Kalos and at the mining site, so Maxwell uses Igneous as his eyes and ears. At Mount Kalos, Igneous is in a massive crowd when he sees Borgin from afar, where he hears Borgin impose Malachi's ideology on everyone, seemingly a daily occurrence there. Mount Kalos was not only a military base, but also a hub for mining resources to transport to the tunnels under Tartarus. Igneous does his best to keep his head low, until a dangerous mining accident occurs, and a bunch of Magnorites are stuck and none of the others bother to help. Igneous is the one who steps out of line to help them, undoing his cover as a regular Magnorite, basically screwing himself over to save others from a much greater danger. With his smarts, he finds a weak spot on the collapsed stones and uses it to free the trapped miners. Borgin arrives to see what happened and finds Igneous having saved the other workers. Rather than being looked down upon for standing apart, Borgin takes a liking to Igneous' quick thinking and tells him to come out of the mines, instead taking a walk with him around the outside of Mount Kalos to chat as all the others are still working tirelessly around them. Borgin actually likes Igneous' company, and he thinks Igneous is from Carthan, not knowing about his plan to end Malachi's reign. Igneous now has a high connection, and reports back to Maxwell, who's been learning about Igneous' interactions in Tartarus through the only messenger bird he has. Maxwell starts seeing Igneous in a new light, as he actually helps humans who are struggling whenever he can, and has more integrity than many others. Still doing good deeds, even when he might be judged for it. He sees Igneous' kindness, and thinks maybe Magnorite truly was capable of thinking for himself. His perspective truly shifts when one unsuspecting day, he suffers an assassination attempt. Malachi's goons discovered Maxwell's messenger bird and killed it after learning who it was working for. Then Malachi sent those same goons to silence Maxwell himself. They threw the messenger bird's body through Maxwell's window, and Maxwell immediately knew what was about to come through his door. He was prepared for such an attempt and fights back, but eventually exhausts his defenses, and when he's about to be struck down, Igneous arrives out of nowhere and shields Maxwell with his body. The blade that would have killed Maxwell does nothing to Igneous. It's a natural progression from the Season 1 scene where Jalkar tries the same thing, but this time, Igneous intentionally steps in the way to block the blade. Once they take out the goons and get out of there, Maxwell asks Igneous why he saved him, and Igneous just says they're both on the same side, wanting to make the kingdom a better place for everyone. Igneous' kind-hearted nature couldn't let them silence him like that, and he was still too naive to suspect Maxwell's two-faced attitude and true intentions. This is the defining moment in Maxwell's arc. And now he sees Igneous as more than just a tool and is completely on his side, deciding to work fully with him rather than using him. Igneous is also becoming closer with Borgin, subtly giving him ideas to revolt against Malachi. Igneous accompanies Borgin to a private meeting, and this is the first time the audience actually sees Malachi face to face. It's a tense, quiet scene with only Igneous, Borgin, and Malachi in the room. And a stark contrast to the loud, booming image everyone has of him, as well as a contrast to what the audience expects. In the script, Malachi was introduced in a bar fight, but rewrite Malachi is widely feared and nobody would dare fight him, especially given his absurd strength even for a Magnorite. And Borgin gives him updates on Mount Kalos's mining and tunnel networking when Malachi drops his ultimate plan on Igneous and the audience. He has been digging a tunnel straight under the town of Phaethon, one of Sidonia's last remaining farming communities. And with the resources gathered at Kalos, he's trying to forge enough explosives to create a force powerful enough to level entire mountains and use it against Sidonia to continue instigating conflict and eventually overpower the kingdom. Malachi is nearing the end of his life, and when Magnorites reach old age, they can either accept death peacefully or fight it as the pressure keeping their bodies together fades. This becomes more agonizing the longer it goes on, as Magnorites are literally holding on to their life force, and this could go on for a maximum of 2 years. Malachi chooses to forcefully hold himself together like this, hurrying to finish his greatest project yet. He's been around long enough to establish this whole regime, and before he dies, he desperately wants to leave a legacy surely no one will ever forget. Igneous does his best to hide how horrified he is, and as Malachi leaves, Igneous notices him fiercely gripping a long axe hammer in his hand. The axe of Carthan leadership. Time for another quick lore tangent. This axe is passed down from Magnorite leader to leader, much like Ardoni master stabs. It's forged from the remains of the strongest Magnorite to ever live, Tartarus. Before he died, he told his subordinates to construct a weapon from his remains as his last will to continue protecting his people even in death. It's enchanted to resist impossible temperatures, absorb kinetic energy and heat to empower itself, and legends claim it is indestructible. It's become a symbol of leadership in Carthan and stands for the will of the people, similarly to the Darksaber lore in Star Wars. Malachi wields this weapon to claim he's meant to lead Carthan, and twisted its original intention to fit his narrative. Sometime after Malachi leaves, Igneous accidentally slips up in front of Borgin, revealing he has outsider knowledge of the world beyond Carthan, something no Magnorite would know unless they were highly ranked or weren't from the kingdom. Borgin catches on and realizes Igneous isn't loyal to Malachi, and initiates a one-on-one traditional Magnorite fight. And although Igneous is physically weaker, he wins, not through sheer force, but ingenuity. The meeting and fight would take place in this room, and Igneous knocks down the chandelier and drops it on Borgin. This room is near the very edge of Tartarus, in a secluded area behind a few doors, so no one would hear the crash. Once Borgin gets up to charge at Igneous, he's unharmed, but in shock that Igneous would pull something like that. All Igneous has to do is move out of the way to evade his angry attacks, and sticks his foot out so Borgin trips and rams straight into the wall instead. Igneous uses his surroundings to his advantage, and they continue this back and forth for a while until the room ends up completely destroyed. Igneous manages to immobilize Borgin and puts his arm around Borgin while he's on the floor, counting to 10 while keeping Borgin in place, like in wrestling matches. And just like that, Igneous has won. Igneous has gotten to know Borgin quite well by now. He was born during Malakai's reign and rose through the ranks because of his blind, almost fanatic loyalty to Malakai. He made Borgin his second in command, and Igneous realized once Borgin had a personal connection to Malakai, he saw firsthand the evils of his reign. Borgin hardened himself to the cruelty over time until he was reduced to an emotionless servant, telling himself it was all for a greater cause. He too doubted Malakai, but was too scared to speak. Igneous may not have known Maxwell's original intentions, but he could sense Borgin was hiding something, and could tell he experienced grief in the same way his friend Sen did. Igneous gives Borgin a hand and offers to help him, saying with his strength, they have a real chance to change the way things are. Igneous' optimism and constant thinking outside the box gives Borgin a hope he hadn't felt in years, that if a weak Magnorite like Igneous could best someone like Borgin, then it's not as futile as it seems. He reluctantly joins Igneous and Maxwell's cause, as Igneous has proved he's capable of showing the way and waking up the mindless from their delusion. Borgin has a quarter of Carthan's total military might under his command, yet he knows if he involves such a large force in the coup, the chances of it leaking to Malakai and their plans being crushed early becomes inevitable. Instead, he only involves a dozen of his most loyal lieutenants in the coup, allying with Maxwell and his army of human soldiers. Maxwell is the only human with some semblance of power in the Carthan hierarchy, so Malakai placed him in command of the human divisions of the army. Humans make up only 1% of their military, but it is better than nothing. They formulate a plan to end Malakai's rule in the vast mine network, and prevent him from blowing up Cydonia at the same time. An extremely high-risk, high-reward plan to topple the dictatorship in one swift move. Malakai does weekly inspections on the Tartarus tunnel, and Borgin knows when he'd be there and when they should strike. Borgin and Igneous infiltrate the tunnels together and confront Malakai on their own, while Maxwell's and Borgin's forces hold back Malakai's relentless horde of mindless followers. As they prepare to part ways, Maxwell and Igneous talk, and Maxwell casually says something like, "Good thing I didn't go through with my original plan of backstabbing you." Igneous laughs with him for a second and is like, "Yeah. Wait, what? Anyways, good luck, my friend. We'll see each other when this is over." The heck? As Maxwell, the human soldiers, and Borgin's lieutenants fight off Malakai's followers, Borgin and Igneous arrive at the end of the tunnel and confront Malakai. The other Magnorites immediately run off, leaving the three alone as it becomes a fight between the strongest Magnorite versus the second strongest and weakest Magnorites. This brawl shows exactly why Malakai is the one who took command, as his sheer strength and durability are incomparable to any other Magnorite. And he has one extra buff that made many follow him unquestionably: his heat power. As their name implies, Magnorites are made from magma, yet they don't seem to burn things or hurt people when they touch them. Instead, we thought Magnorites would have the ability to control the heat they emit like a furnace. Most Magnorites aren't born with much of this power and can't properly weaponize it, only ever being able to contain their heat within themselves. Some train themselves to weaponize the heat they naturally emit and use it in battle. However, not all Magnorites burn with the same amount of heat. Most can barely emit enough to burn on contact, while some Magnorites born with greater power emit such powerful natural heat that other living things in their vicinity could burst into flames. The drawback is if a Magnorite emits their heat without rest and forces themselves to burn hotter and brighter, they will eventually burn through their entire life force and die by exploding with the force of the heat they're emitting. Many Magnorites will not take that risk. And then we have Malakai. He's one of the few born with such great heat power that he has to contain it at all times. From the moment he was born, the very stone around him immediately turned white hot and any organic matter was instantly carbonized. Malakai was born with immense power, an anomaly amongst Magnorites, as he learned to control his power and weaponize it to perfection. Now that he's fighting two traitors to his perfect kingdom, he has no reason to hold back and unleashes the heat and power he's been containing for his entire life in this fight. Igneous may be smart, but now he's in a dark cave surrounded by explosives and fighting the strongest Magnorite alive. Malakai rips off Igneous' left arm and beats Borgin to a magma pulp, easily defeating them both. Malakai even references his initial attack on Cydonia in an attempt to further humiliate the pair, saying how the young captain of Cydonia, a mere human warrior with no magic or special weapons, put up more of a fight against him than both of them together. But this does prove he can be defeated in single combat. Magma drips from the stub by Igneous' shoulder, and despite that brutal hit, he keeps fighting in his own way. He tricks Malakai into starting the explosion early, taunting the crazed Magnorite by coercing him into releasing his heat indiscriminately, as he's being beaten up. Igneous manages to anger Malachi enough to the point that the whole stone cavern turns white hot. With the last of his strength, he pushes Malachi into the center of the cave, and he falls into the stone like quicksand due to it being way too hot, keeping him in place as he sinks into the ground and becomes stuck. The obsidian containers around the room holding the explosives heat up as well, and despite his pain, Igneous helps Borgin up and together they run off into the tunnels, fleeing as Malachi tries to escape too. His heat makes the obsidian itself burn into a red-hot state, igniting the materials inside of them. By the time the explosion has set off, Igneous and Borgin are halfway through the maze of tunnels, and just as Malachi freed himself from Igneous' trip and took the first step out, the room immediately blew up, as all the obsidian containers were ignited. This explosion was not technically ready, and didn't even have the full force Malachi planned yet. But it was so powerful, its shockwave knocked Igneous and Borgin further down the tunnel and back to the mining site at Tartarus, saving their lives. So, as you can see, in this fan rewrite, Igneous lives, albeit with a missing arm. I'm fairly certain some of you are not very happy about this, and have a whole list of reasons to keep Igneous dead. So here are my arguments for keeping Igneous alive. Welcome everyone who skipped straight to this part. Yes, I know you're there. So, spoiler alert, Igneous survives the explosion. I had a feeling half of you would be disappointed either way we went, whether he lived or died. So, why should Igneous survive? I gathered a list of people's arguments about why Igneous should stay dead, then prepared some counter-arguments for you skeptics, as well as some rewrite-specific reasons to keep him alive. Number 1. Respecting his sacrifice. I would argue his sacrifice wasn't respected enough in the original script. Outside of one quick mention to Sen and a scene of Mount Igneous in the epilogue, there was no mention of him at all. If he lives, we have the chance to continue honoring him throughout the story and have others actually acknowledge what he lost to achieve peace, by still losing an arm and struggling to adjust to that despite his cheery demeanor. Next, his death was a cost for victory. His death doesn't have to be the cost for victory. That's not the only way for this scene to be impactful. The victory cost was arguably higher in the rewrite by having the civilians of Phaethon and a chunk of their town get blown to bits in Malachi's nuke. Igneous is gonna have to work to help reconcile the two kingdoms in spite of the fact that they still did damage to a Sidonian town. Alright, next up, a bittersweet ending for his arc, and a necessary story beat. Igneous didn't have much of an arc in the script. He was always the same optimistic guy who never saw any change. In this rewrite, he started naive and still extremely optimistic. However, Igneous' time in Carthan and surviving the explosion allows him to face the harshness of reality, and it shapes his perspective, letting him grow as a result. It may make sense on the surface for an idealist like him to die for their cause, but it's even more impactful if Igneous remains just as positive through it all. He's no longer naive to the ways of the world, yet he continues smiling to lift others up and help them see things the way they could be, like how he does. And about his sacrifice as an essential story beat, Igneous' death was important to the audience, yes, but it didn't really impact other characters. Whether he lived or died, the outcome for Carthan was the same, so his death doesn't truly carry the weight it should have. And Igneous can still have a mountain named after him. One was nearly dedicated to Malachi while he was still alive, so there's no reason for Igneous not to have one. There's one final argument to counter, the emotional beats with Sen. As I said earlier, it's just one scene where he's acknowledged, and that's it. In script, Sen, being the blank slate he is, doesn't change at all because of it. We can arguably get far more emotional beats when they reunite and when Igneous stands on Sen's side, never doubting his friend. Sen and Igneous are both outcasts turned legendary heroes, and through Igneous' survival, their dynamic can be far more than what the script presented. We've also been subtly incorporating changes in our rewrite that allow Igneous' survival to be even more meaningful than his death. I'll expand more on these reasons once we get further in the story. But I've foreshadowed him living and nobody noticed. Anyone remember this drawing from the Tidesinger video? Look closely, and if we just remove a layer here real quick... Yep, it's Igneous. He's been there the whole time. Now that we've established some legitimate reasoning behind keeping Igneous alive, let's get back to the actual rewrite. So, Igneous and Borgin were far enough away to survive the explosion, but it still had devastating consequences. The mountains near the explosion are completely leveled, and Phaethon isn't spared from the destruction. The outer Sidonian town suffers the initial brunt of the destruction as the shockwave sends houses flying off their foundations, and 60% of the population was killed. The range of the explosion was massive. Malachi was basically constructing a nuke, and this radius would have been even greater if he finished building it. Despite there being casualties in Phaethon, 40% of the townsfolk survived, so Igneous and his allies saved more lives than if they did nothing at all. Igneous finds help for Borgin, given he was beaten up even more severely, and they help cover Igneous' wound so he doesn't keep bleeding out magma. Igneous fights the pain and stumbles back to the explosion site, only finding a massive crater where the mountains once stood. Igneous squints and sees a small, moving figure at the bottom of the crater. Malachi was still alive. Through his crazy durability, he barely survived the explosion and attempts climbing out of the smoking rubble, yet his body is now incredibly weak, brittle, and filled with cracks as magma leaks from them. All of Malachi's movements cause his body to have the sound of rocks falling apart, and even still in this weakened state, his rage fuels him. Kinda like another rewrite character I know. Igneous slides down to the bottom of the crater as he walks up to Malachi and sees a shining object in the distance. The Axe of Leadership. It endured the explosion completely unscathed, yet his thoughts about its indestructibility are cut short by Malachi's pained groans. Upon seeing Igneous, he finds the strength to speedwalk over to him and punches him so hard that he sends our boy flying backwards and crashing through a boulder. Yet in doing so, Malachi's right arm falls apart, for his brittle body could no longer handle the force of his own strength. Igneous composes himself and tries calming Malachi down, only to be hit again as Malachi uses his left arm. His punch still sends Igneous skating backwards, leaving a trail on the floor. And then, Malachi's left arm falls off as well. Malachi keeps trying to rile up Igneous as his legs begin to crumble too, and he falls to the ground, slowly dying a brutal, Magnorite-exclusive death. Igneous walks up to him and kneels to the limbless Malachi, who commands Igneous to just finish the job like a real Magnorite. Instead, Igneous tries comforting him as he exhausts his remaining strength, insulting our boy until he finally dies. Malachi's body completely falls apart into a pile of rocks and magma, and Igneous just stares solemnly at the sight on his knees. Borgin and the Magnorites walk up behind Igneous, and Borgin puts his hand on Igneous' shoulder as the camera pans out, focusing on the kneeling Igneous next to the pile of rubble that was once the mighty leader of Carthan, ending the episode. In the aftermath, chaos erupted in Malachi's council as news of their leader's death reached them, believing it was a mining disaster. The Magnorites fight each other for the right to become the next leader, when all of a sudden Borgin, Igneous, Maxwell, and a multitude of soldiers walk in, and Borgin throws the Axe of Leadership in the center of the table to get everyone's attention. He explains what actually happened, and declares they defeated Malachi in a coup, and how the small, weak Magnorite was the one who finished Malachi off. The council is in shock, and after some more debating, they settle on appointing Igneous as the new leader of Carthan, since he technically is the one who destroyed Malachi. Igneous is taken by surprise, but immediately refuses, mainly because he doesn't want to be stuck in Carthan for the rest of his life, and also because he knows he's not cut out for the job. He gives the responsibility to Borgin, and admits he's stronger and would make for a better leader. Igneous takes the Axe of Leadership and hands it to Borgin as Maxwell proclaims Borgin as the new leader of Carthan, signifying the official change in leadership and finally ending the authoritarian grasp Malachi once had over the kingdom. In the epilogue of Season 2, we see Igneous replace his lost arm with an obsidian one, and stays in Carthan for a little while longer to help rebuild and prepare for what's to come. Under a newly reformed council, Carthan begins preparations to make amends with Cydonia. As preparations for the delegation are made, a messenger arrives and declares news that the Second Great War had begun. As Borgin and Igneous look at each other, the camera fades to black, ending their arc in Season 2. Ultimately, Carthan being separated from the Union worked to their advantage, as when the Nether invaded the overworld, they used the beacons for fast travel to all the capitals and easily took over most of the world. Yet the one kingdom that had no beacon access was Carthan. So the Nether was unable to conquer them from the inside, and struggled invading their lands from the outside in a long conflict known as the Carthan Campaign. In the 2 years between Seasons 2 and 3, Carthan became more and more like the United Kingdom in the first part of World War II as they were fighting alone. The war was a struggle for both sides, and Igneous trained with Borgin and other Magnorites to learn the basics of self-defense, now being an average fighter, but Igneous' real use lay in his strategies and intellect. He's responsible for some of Carthan's victories against the Nether, even utilizing the rock giant mountains to their advantage as a natural defense. Eventually, news of the Knights of Ardonia reached Carthan, and Igneous remembered the name from Season 1, Episode 10. Thanks to Igneous, the Carthan armies arrived in Meridian from the sands of the desert and cut off the enemy's retreat in the Battle of Two Beacons. helping free Sidonia's capital and cementing once and for all the newly established unity between the two kingdoms. Igneous reunites with Sen after the fight, and they are both ecstatic to see each other. They bond as friends again. However, Sen is not the only Knight of Ardonia Igneous sees at Meridian. He also meets Onyx. We're changing Onyx's death so he doesn't die in Meridian. Not sure if I've mentioned this yet, so here you go. So, we have the weakest Magnorite who saved Carthan, and the Magnorite who's accomplished nothing. Onyx tries picking on Igneous at Meridian, but other Magnorites overhear him and stand up for Igneous as a sign of respect since he literally freed their entire kingdom. Igneous accompanies Sen to Ataraxia, officially joining the Knights of Ardonia, and entrusting Borgin and Maxwell with everything in Carthan. Onyx joins them in Ataraxia too, still riddled with insecurities. When the city is sacked by the Voltaris, Igneous ends up being separated from Sen and Rhea as they run, and he decides to instead help out those in need. He encounters a lone Voltaris and fends him off, utilizing his obsidian arm as a shield and saves a whole family of civilians. Then, he pushes the Voltaris off a ledge to end the fight, and he looks down saying something like, "Yeah, I'm sure he'll be fine," and runs off. Meanwhile, Onyx and Grek help people evacuate when a collapsing floating island lands near them, and Onyx pushes Grek into the evacuation trail while he remains on the floating islands, now with the big gap splitting them up. Onyx sees a score of Voltaris warriors charge at him, and looks back at Grek and says some corny Magnorite-sounding thing like, "Go on without me, meathead, this is gonna get ugly." Onyx unleashes his natural heat as Grek tries to get to him, but he too is being held back by other Voltaris. Onyx manages to kill 2 of them, but he's being overwhelmed, and keeps releasing more and more heat until his body begins glowing. Onyx lets out a heart-rending roar, and he blows up into a boiling hot nothingness, taking the remaining Voltaris down with him. Grek watched Onyx die and feels remorseful since despite their quips and fights, they were still brothers in arms. His sadness quickly turns to rage towards the Voltaris that prevented him from reaching his friend, and he kills all of them without mercy. After the battle, Igneous helps Grek deal with Onyx's death and sends abduction right after. Now that he's with the Knights, I'll go over some other reasons we made Igneous live and what role he plays in the rebellion. He supports Sen after he's abducted. Only Igneous, Val, Grim, and Grek believe Sen would never betray his friends and surrender to the Death Singer. Igneous and Grek bond over anecdotes about Sen, until they too become good friends. Also, Igneous basically goes full chronicler mode when he sees Achillean, asking him questions about his life and the Great War since he's a living legend. He's excited to talk with the Tide Singer himself, and takes an extensive amount of notes about everything he says, just as a fun side detail. As the Knights cross the Northwind Flats, Igneous releases all of his natural heat and produces enough warmth to serve as a natural heater for those less acquainted with the cold, and makes the trek a lot easier. He even has a small moment with Grim at Frostburn, but that's a good story for another time. When the Tide Singer dies, his role in the Knights of Ardonia is split between Rhea and Igneous. Rhea takes the leadership role, and Igneous becomes the new rock for the Knights. Igneous and Achillean were both there to support everyone, and now that the other most morally sound person is gone, Igneous takes up that mantle from Achillean. When the Knights and representatives from all the free territories meet in Tartarus, Igneous reunites with Aaron, who survived the war, and they briefly catch up. Aaron offers Igneous the job again, but Igneous politely refuses. Aaron just says, "Worth a shot," as the two old friends have a good laugh. Borgin and Maxwell are there too, and they helped organize this all in their capital city. In the meeting, some commanders, including Hassan, question the possibility of using the rock giants as weapons against the Nether, just like Malachi used them against Sidonia. Borgin immediately shuts that idea down, since the rock giants are uncontrollable and far too dangerous to use offensively. Sen unexpectedly arrives at Tartarus alongside Rhea, and Igneous' stance was proven right as they both explain he was not a traitor, and Igneous is glad to see his friend again. And so, Igneous goes along with the Knights to Crown Peak to liberate Ardonia in the final episode. Okay, since Igneous crosses paths with him here, I may as well discuss one last character, Solomon. As much as I love his stupid death in the script, we have something new for him. Solomon in this rewrite isn't just a lazy bum throughout the war. Instead, he has to earn his keep and becomes the official head alchemist of the Triple Threat Alliance, brewing all sorts of potions for the enemy. He expanded his rudimentary lab into a larger facility and even hired some goons with the threat of either helping him or being enslaved. Now back to the Crown Peak battle, Solomon tries fleeing the scene like a coward after he betrayed all of Ardonia, selfishly abandoning his alchemist crew and taking a whole caravan filled with all the potions they had with him. Igneous coincidentally intercepts Solomon coming out of a secret passageway through the mountains with his potion caravan. Igneous basically goes, "Hey, wait a minute, this isn't right," and easily subdues Solomon, bringing 3 carts filled to the brim with potions to the army. And so, Solomon isn't killed, instead sentenced to life in prison for his treacherous actions, and will most likely die of old age in his rotten, lonely, dark, and dirty prison cell. An appropriate fate for Solomon, if you ask me. Igneous also has a funny moment with Grek as he tries to drink a potion. Igneous is curious and says something like, "There's never been a recorded incident of a Jagathan drinking a potion. We're making history here." And then the whole potion incident from the script happens. Igneous takes notes of everything while Grimm innocently stands there in the corner, watching. After the main Crown Peak battle, Igneous talks with Sen, Hubris, and Grek next to the relit nether portal as they promise to go help Grek find other Jagathans in the future. However, a wither blasts the portal and Sen pushes Igneous in to protect him. This replaces Hubris pushing Grek from the script, hence why Igneous is not in the Pythos fight, but Grek is. Igneous survives the Second Great War, and he's there when Sen becomes the Voltaris Master. He joins the Knights of Ardonia on their journeys, and he's the one who reads the Carthan and Cydonia section on the Walls of Time in the epilogue, deservedly replacing Nitsuki. In Carthan, Borgin led the Reformed Council to restore Cydonia's once fertile lands and uphold peace between the two neighboring kingdoms. Meanwhile, Maxwell becomes the international ambassador for Carthan, advocating for unity and reconciliation between Magnorites and humans, using his own experiences to help the cause. Igneous stays with his friends and serves as the honorary chronicler of the Knights of Ardonia, documenting the group's adventures and finally receiving the happy ending our favorite Magnorite deserved. The original Carthan subplot was, in my opinion, extremely forgettable, even more so than the Felden arc. This rewrite intends to fix that problem by giving more weight and relevance to Igneous' story, and showing the brutality of the authoritarian nightmare he freed Carthan from. Malachi's tyranny in the script felt half-baked, especially since his introduction was literally him getting in a bar fight with a rebel. How could he possibly govern the kingdom with an iron fist if he allows peasants to try and punch him? Rewrite Malachi is a much more realistic dictator, and this version of Carthan is partially inspired by other fictional dystopias, like 1984, with some echoes of the tyranny seen in Hadestown as well. Besides the general lore additions we made, arguably the biggest, and probably most controversial change, is Igneous' survival. I'm sure a few of you are still on the fence about that, but I believe we made enough changes to allow Igneous surviving to be the genuinely better choice for his arc. In the script, he had nowhere to go and nothing to do if he did live. Through the rewrite, the explosion is a massive hurdle in his arc, one that ultimately lets him grow far more as a character than he ever could if that was where his story ended. Also, remember the block giants? They never actually ended up awakening to affect the plot, despite all the warnings and talk about using them as weapons. When Aaron mentions them, and then Hassan later, you'd probably think they're eventually gonna show up, but that never happens as a subversion of expectations. After all, the block giants are dormant and don't want to cause chaos, and so any action involving them stays in the history books. And maybe future spin-offs if this idea is actually considered by the real rewrite team. Thank you so much for watching. Alex and I were definitely looking forward to this video much more than the Felden one, so I really hope you liked it. We still have 2 more rewrites left, and the last one especially should be fun since we have a few ideas to involve the community and all of you in it too. I'll leave you guys with some more amazing rewrite fan arts, and I hope to see you in the next one.